She only wanted silence, a break from noise, from people, from pain. Claire Whitaker wasn't running away. She just needed space to breathe. What she didn't expect, hiking alone in the freezing stillness of a Montana winter, was to become something she never imagined: a mother to a wild soul. In the middle of snow-covered forests and aching solitude, something small and fragile would reach out to her. And in saving it, she would finally begin to save herself. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about connection, instinct, and the kind of love that doesn't need words. The silence of snow. A woman alone. The wind whispered through the pine trees like a hush meant for her alone. Claire Whitaker trudged slowly up the snow-laced trail in Gallatin National Forest, each boot sinking a few inches into the powdery white that blanketed the earth. The air was crisp, almost glass-like, the kind that cut into your lungs with each breath, but still left you feeling clean inside. Her cheeks were already pink from the cold, her auburn hair tucked into a thick wool cap. Strapped to her back was a light hiking pack, minimalist and efficient, just like the woman herself. She was 34, lean from years of solo hikes and a tendency to walk things off instead of talk them out. Her gray eyes, soft but often distant, swept the horizon now as if searching for something. But she wasn't. Not really. She'd driven up from Bozeman 2 days ago looking for quiet. Not the kind you get in a soundproof room, but the raw, untamed quiet that only snow and isolation can offer. It was mid-December. Families were stringing up lights. Couples were taking engagement photos in town squares. Claire had opted for the wilderness. Grief has a way of piling up like snow. First, her father passed. A sudden heart attack, gone before she could say goodbye. Then Marcus, her boyfriend of 4 years, left just after the funeral, saying he couldn't carry her sadness anymore. He'd said it gently, but it had cut like broken ice. After that, Claire stopped talking much altogether. Now, the snow beneath her boots crunched rhythmically, a small comfort in a world otherwise muffled. She paused at a clearing, hands resting on her hips, watching the soft flurries dance under a pale gray sky. The trail here narrowed, framed by tall evergreens and silent ridges of ice-covered stone. No birds, no distant highway, just silence. And for now, that was enough. She reached a small ridge overlooking a frozen creek, half buried under snow. The sight made her exhale deeply, a sigh, not of exhaustion, but release. Here, she felt unseen, unmeasured. She could let the weight on her shoulders melt into the ground. Her cabin was still an hour's hike west, tucked beneath a bluff that shielded it from wind. It was rustic, wood-heated, no electricity. But it was hers. Her father had built it when she was in college. She hadn't visited it much until now. As she adjusted the straps on her backpack and started back toward the trail, a faint sound tickled her ears. It wasn't the wind, not a branch breaking. It was a sound too soft, too quick, like a whimper. She froze, stood perfectly still, tilted her head. There it was again. A fragile, breathy cry carried on the wind. Not human, not loud, but real. Claire's brows furrowed. She turned slightly, trying to trace the sound's direction. Nothing moved. The trees were statues, the snow undisturbed, but something was out there, something alive. Her heart picked up, slightly, not in fear, but in the familiar adrenaline of the unknown. The forest, so comforting a minute ago, now felt laced with questions. She didn't know it yet, but this sound would change everything. Because Claire Whitaker was no longer walking alone. Whispers in the white, the first encounter. The cry came again, softer this time, almost swallowed by the wind. Claire hesitated, one hand instinctively moving to her jacket zipper, as if drawing it up could protect her from the unknown. Her breath came in visible puffs as she turned her head slowly, scanning the forest like a compass needle twitching towards something magnetic. There, just a few feet off the trail, near a cluster of snow-dusted scrub, she stepped cautiously, boots crunching over thin layers of ice, careful not to snap any branches. Her eyes followed the disturbance in the otherwise pristine snow. Small tracks. Paw prints. Maybe 3 inches long. Feline, definitely. Not dog, not coyote. Bobcat, her mind offered. But young. Claire knelt beside the tracks, brushing snow aside. The pads were fresh, edges crisp, no wind-blown blur. She followed the trail with her eyes. The prints staggered slightly, curving toward a tangle of low pine and brush. Then she heard it again, closer. A plaintive, wheezing mewl, almost like a kitten's, but hoarser, more desperate. She gently parted the branches and froze. Nestled under a thin shelf of snow, curled into a miserable ball, was a tiny bobcat kitten. Its fur, golden-brown with faint black spots, was clumped with frost. Short ears ended in tiny black tufts, and its stubby tail twitched once, weakly. One eye was half closed, the other glazed and unfocused. Claire's breath caught. It was no larger than a house cat, maybe 10, 12 inches long. But it wasn't just its size that gripped her. It was its stillness. The quiet, trembling stillness of something barely holding on. Her first instinct was caution. This was a wild animal. Alone or not, injured or not, a bobcat was no domestic pet. Even a kitten could scratch, bite, lash out. But the logic in her brain was silenced by the voice in her chest. He's not going to make it. She pulled off her gloves, reached out a hand slowly, fingers extended. The kitten didn't move, didn't growl, didn't even blink, just trembled. Carefully, gently she scooped the small body into her scarf, wrapping it close to her chest. The heat of her skin met the icy chill of its fur, and for a moment, Claire thought she felt its heartbeat. Weak. But there. She stood, cradling the creature, snow beginning to fall heavier now. She had a cabin, a fire, a chance, and a decision she had already made without realizing it. Claire moved quickly now, boots pressing harder into the snow as the wind picked up around her. The flurries thickened, swirling sideways like white sand in a shaken glass globe. Cradling the bundled bobcat against her chest, she could feel how alarmingly light it was. Just skin, fur, and fragile bones. Her breath came in sharp bursts, but she didn't stop. Not to question, not to look back. The trail ahead disappeared under the storm's breath, but her feet knew the path. She had walked it before, never with this urgency. The cabin came into view like a shadow made of wood and memory. A squat, timber-framed shelter, darkened by the season but solid, like her father had intended it to be. Smoke still curled faintly from the chimney. She pushed the door open, shouldered it shut behind her, and was instantly enveloped in the scent of pine, old blankets, and faint ash. She knelt by the wood stove, placed the kitten, no, the bobcat, on a thick wool sweater, spread over a chair cushion, and stoked the coals to life. The fire hissed softly as it caught, light dancing along the stone hearth. Only then did she sit back and look, really look, at what she had brought inside. He was beautiful, tiny, but unmistakably wild. His coat shimmered in gold and brown tones, with muted spots and rings along his legs and tail. His ears were tipped with black tufts, like little flames, and his face, though still young, already carried the faint outline of a predator's cheekbones. But he was also broken. One paw was stiff with ice. His breathing was shallow. His eyes blinked slowly, once, then again, as if unsure what world he was waking up in. Claire reached for a bowl of warm water, dipped a soft cloth, and gently began wiping the frost from his fur. He flinched, but didn't resist. Her hands moved carefully, as though she were touching something sacred. This should have been the part where she hesitated. where the warnings flooded in. He's wild. He belongs out there. What are you doing? But none came. Instead, her thoughts drifted to the days when her father used to bring home stray animals, injured birds, a raccoon once, a baby fox he nursed for a week before setting free. He used to say, "Sometimes they find you because you're the one who'll understand." Claire looked down at the kitten now, trembling but alive. "I guess you found me," she whispered, and she didn't look back. Through the ice, connection begins. A cabin shared with a wild soul. The storm raged through the night, but inside the cabin, time slowed to a hush. The firelight flickered across the wooden floor as Claire moved gently, silently. The bobcat lay nestled on the chair cushion, no longer shivering, his breath now steady if still shallow. Claire sat nearby, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching over him like a sentinel. She hadn't slept. Every few minutes she checked to make sure his chest was still rising. Every hour she warmed a towel and laid it softly over his curled frame. He didn't fight or touch. He barely acknowledged it. But he didn't turn away either. When dawn broke, weak light spilled through the frost-glazed windows. Claire finally allowed herself to exhale. The kitten had made it through the night. She rummaged through her supplies, pouring warm water into a saucer and setting it near the chair. Then she opened a can of shredded chicken, something meant for camping meals, and scooped a bit into a small dish. She set it down and stepped back. At first he didn't move, but then his nose twitched, and slowly, cautiously, he lifted his head and sniffed the air. Claire watched, barely breathing. With jerky effort, the kitten pushed himself up, staggering a little as he crossed the cushion and reached the bowl. He dipped his nose into the meat, took one bite, then another. It wasn't elegant, but it was survival. And for Claire it was everything. She smiled, just a little. "You're a fighter," she murmured. That afternoon, she made a small bed for him near the hearth. Folded towels, one of her old flannel shirts, a small pillow she rarely used. He curled into it almost instinctively, tail twitching once before stilling again. She kept talking to him, not in a baby voice, not in the tone used for pets, but as if he were someone real, someone who understood. The isolation that once echoed through the cabin now felt thinner, softer, not gone, but gentler. That evening, as she sipped tea and watched snow fall like feathers outside the window, Claire whispered, almost without thinking, "Ash." She didn't know where the name came from. Maybe it was the gray dusting on his back, or the way he had nearly disappeared into the cold, like a dying ember. Maybe it was just the sound. But when she said it, the kitten turned his head toward her. Not fully, not knowingly, but enough. She smiled again. "Okay, Ash," she said softly. "Let's figure this out together." Naming him Ash. The name settled between them like the falling snow, quiet, certain, and strangely fitting. Ash. Every time Claire said it aloud, something about the word seemed to belong to him, not in the way one names a pet, but in the way you call something sacred by the name it already had. The days that followed were a rhythm of small, silent routines. Ash slept near the hearth while Claire chopped firewood, melted snow for water, and kept the fire burning through the bitter Montana cold. She spoke to him often, narrating the quiet life they shared, even if he never responded. But he was listening. She could see it in the flick of his ears, the way his head tilted when she read aloud from her father's old field guides, the slight shift of his body when she whispered thoughts she hadn't dared say out loud in months. Ash's recovery was slow. His limp persisted, and he tired easily. But with every passing day, a bit more wildness returned to his eyes. The dull glaze lifted. His movements grew more fluid. At one point, Claire caught him crouched at the window, staring at the snowflakes with the alert posture of a hunter. It should have worried her. Instead, it made her ache, with pride, with fear, with the knowledge that this creature she was nursing back to life was not hers to keep. Still, she clung to the present. She sketched him one afternoon. Just a quick charcoal drawing in the corner of her notebook. She labeled it, Ash, Day 6. The page that followed was a journal entry, written in her usual looping handwriting. There's something about him. He doesn't speak, doesn't come close unless he chooses to. But when he looks at me, I feel like I'm being seen. Not judged, not pitied. Just seen. I haven't felt that in a long time. Ash, for his part, grew bolder. He explored the corners of the cabin, sniffing the boots by the door, pausing near the windowsill, pawing at her backpack. Once, she laughed when he swatted a pine needle across the floor like a toy. It was the first time she'd laughed aloud since everything. That night she sat by the fire. Ash curled a few feet away and whispered, "You're still wild. I know that. But maybe that's what I needed. Not something tame, just something real." Ash didn't move, but his ears twitched. Claire leaned back, watching the flames dance in his eyes. For now, he was here, and she was no longer alone. Between claws and hearts, first climax, confrontation with a neighbor. The knock came sharp and sudden. Claire looked up from the sink, her hands still damp from washing the tea mug. Ash lifted his head near the hearth, ears twitching, body instantly alert. Another knock, louder this time. Claire wiped her hands, crossed the cabin, and opened the door. There, framed by the gray sky and blowing snow, stood Rick Dalton. Tall, broad-shouldered, weathered. In his late 60s, with a jaw that looked like it had clenched through 1,000 winters. Rick was the nearest neighbor, if you could call someone 5 miles down a snowy trail a neighbor. "Morning," he said, though his tone was far from friendly. Claire blinked, surprised. "Rick? Everything okay?" His eyes darted past her into the cabin. "I saw prints. Fresh ones. Bobcat. Came right up to your porch." Claire's heart skipped. She said nothing. Rick took a step forward, boots crunching on the ice deck. "Don't play dumb, Claire. You're keeping it, aren't you?" She bristled. "I'm helping him recover. He was nearly frozen." "He's a wild animal," Rick snapped. "Not a stray cat. You're putting yourself, and the rest of us, at risk." Claire stepped out and pulled the door behind her, shielding Ash from view. "He's a kitten. He wouldn't have made it another night." "And what happens when he's not a kitten anymore?" Rick's voice grew harder. "You think that animal's going to stay sweet? One day, he's going to remember what he is. That'll be a nice surprise when you're asleep." Claire stiffened, her voice low. "You don't know him." "He's a bobcat, Claire. I don't need to know him." The cold between them was deeper than the snow. Rick shook his head. "You should call Fish and Game. They'll handle it, before it becomes a bigger problem." He turned, trudging back down the trail without waiting for a reply. Claire stood frozen, wind tugging at her coat, snowflakes collecting in her lashes. When she finally stepped back inside, Ash was still near the fire, watching the door, eyes wide and unblinking. She knelt beside him, pressed a hand to his side. "I won't let them take you," she whispered. Her voice was calm, but her world had just shifted. Because kindness, when it threatens fear, always invites conflict. The moral dilemma. The door shut with a thud that echoed through the cabin like a warning. Claire stood still for a long moment, her back against the wood, the cold of Rick's words still clinging to her skin more than the snow outside. Ash hadn't moved. He lay curled tightly, his tail wrapped around his hind legs, golden eyes fixed on her, wary. She walked over slowly, sat cross-legged on the floor beside him. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. But hadn't she? Hadn't she scooped him from the snow knowing what it meant? Hadn't she chosen to carry him home? To feed him? To whisper to him in the quiet hours of dawn? She looked at Ash, really looked, at his growing strength, the subtle power starting to ripple through his muscles, even in rest. He wasn't the frail thing she'd rescued anymore. His paws were larger now, his gaze more certain. The spots along his coat had darkened, the soft beige of his chest fur glowing like firelight in the warmth of the cabin. He was beautiful. And he didn't belong here. Rick's words echoed again. He's going to remember what he is. Claire drew her knees to her chest, resting her chin on them. Her heart pulled in two directions, one wild and aching, the other sharp with fear. What if Rick was right? What if this bond she felt was just one-sided hope? What if she was turning Ash into something he wasn't meant to be? She reached for her father's journal on the side table, dog-eared, weather-stained, full of field notes and thoughts from years of hiking, observing, rescuing. On the inside flap, in her father's handwriting, it read, "We're not meant to tame the wild. We're meant to witness it, and when we can, protect it." Claire closed the journal slowly, breath catching in her throat. Maybe that's what this was. Not taming, not possessing, just protecting for now. She looked at Ash again. "I don't know how this ends," she said softly. "But I promise, I won't make you less than what you are." Ash blinked. Then slowly, he stretched, stood, and walked over to her, pressing his head gently against her knee. Claire closed her eyes. She had made her choice, even if it meant standing alone. The avalanche, trapped in white silence. The snow came fast that morning, faster than even the forecasts had warned. Claire stood on the porch, coffee mug warming her hands, eyes fixed on the horizon. Heavy clouds had swallowed the ridgeline, pressing low like a weight ready to fall. The pines swayed under the burden of fresh powder, and the air was thick with the hush of something about to snap. Inside, Ash paced near the window, ears flattened, tail twitching in short, agitated flicks. He hadn't touched his food, had barely slept the night before. Every time the wind howled, he froze, nose lifted toward the door. Claire watched him now, uneasy. "Something's wrong," she murmured. She grabbed the radio from the shelf and turned the dial. Static. A brief hiss, then whiteout conditions. Strong avalanche risk near Elk Creek Trail. Travel strongly discouraged. Her stomach dropped. That was Rick's usual hunting route. Without hesitation, she threw on her coat, pulled on her boots, and stepped into the storm. The snow was knee-deep already and falling thicker by the second. The wind slapped at her face, stinging her eyes. Claire fought her way toward the trail junction half a mile north, where Rick's tracks would usually cross. Her breath burned, and every step felt heavier. Then she saw it. A line of snapped trees and churned snow. A fresh avalanche scar running down the side of the ridge. Claire's heart pounded. She stumbled forward, calling out, "Rick!" Nothing. Then again, "Rick." Silence. She moved closer to the edge of the slide zone, eyes scanning for anything, movement, color, sound. But there was nothing but white and wreckage. She pulled her scarf higher, her fingers numb, turned back toward the cabin. She didn't get far. Behind her, a sound, barely audible over the storm. A banging, dull, rhythmic. Claire spun, squinting through the snow. There, just beneath a mound, something metal. She scrambled forward, digging with her hands, clawing at the packed powder. It was the top of a truck cab. Her breath caught. He was under there. Alive? She dug harder, hands bleeding from the cold. "Rick!" she shouted. Then, another bang. Fainter, but real. She screamed for him to hold on and didn't stop digging. Back at the cabin, Ash stood at the window, eyes locked on the storm, body tense. The wild knew, and it was calling her back into it. Ash's instinct saves a life. The storm blurred everything, sky and earth, folding into one relentless sheet of white. Claire's arms ached. Her gloves were soaked through, fingers numb and stiff. Snow filled the gaps she cleared faster than she could scoop it away. But she kept digging, frantic, driven by something deeper than logic. Then, movement. A gloved hand pressed weakly against the inside of the truck's shattered window. Claire gasped. "Rick!" His eyes blinked behind the cracked glass, dazed and sunken. The cab had taken the brunt of the avalanche, half crushed under snow and branches. He was alive, but barely. Claire dropped to her knees, yelled over the wind. "I'm going to get help! Hold on!" But she knew there was no one else. The nearest ranger station was a day's hike. No one would reach him in time. And then, suddenly, she remembered Ash. Ash pacing the windows. Ash, alert before the first flake had fallen. She scrambled to her feet, tore through the trail she had made, and raced back to the cabin. Ash met her at the door, wild eyes locking onto hers. His body was already tensed, tail low, ears pinned. "You knew," Claire breathed. He trotted to the edge of the porch, circled once, and barked, a sharp, guttural sound she'd never heard from him before. Then he bounded into the snow. Claire followed. Ash led, weaving effortlessly through the thick white, cutting a direct path back toward the buried truck. He didn't hesitate, even when the terrain steepened or the wind roared louder. Claire stumbled after him, heart racing, lungs burning. When they reached the wreck, Ash climbed atop the mound, sniffed, then dug, fast, urgent. His paws flung snow aside with powerful strokes. Claire joined him, re-energized by his certainty. Together, woman and the Bobcat cleared enough snow for Claire to wrench the door open. The truck groaned, but held. She reached in, grabbed Rick's coat, and began dragging him free, inch by inch. Rick gasped as fresh air hit his face. Ash stepped back, his eyes never leaving the scene. Rick's eyes fluttered open, found Claire's face. "You came," he rasped. Claire nodded, voice hoarse. "You're going to be okay." But it wasn't just her. Ash stood at her side, silent, a sentinel of the snow. Not tame, not owned, but connected. And in that moment, Rick understood what Claire had always known. The wild doesn't just take. Sometimes it gives back. The instinct to let go. When the wild calls. Winter began to break. Not in any dramatic way, just a quiet softening. The wind no longer howled quite as fiercely, and the snow that once came sideways now drifted gently like feathers, falling from the sky. The days grew longer, the sun warmer, and Ash began to change. Claire noticed it first in his pacing. He circled the cabin restlessly, especially at dawn and dusk. His ears flicked at distant sounds she couldn't hear, his nose pressed to the window longer, more often. One morning, he stood at the door before she even got out of bed, tail rigid, body humming with energy. She opened it. He stepped outside just a few feet, nose lifted, eyes scanning the tree line. Then he came back inside without a sound. But something had shifted. By now his limp was gone. He moved like water, silent, precise, powerful. His coat had thickened into its full winter shine, golden brown with ghost-like spots, the black tufts on his ears sharp and proud. He was no longer the fragile creature she'd pulled from the snow. He was wild again. And the wild was calling. Claire didn't speak of it, not even to herself. But she felt it. In the mornings, when Ash sat by the door. In the evenings, when he stood by the window long after the fire had dimmed. He wasn't meant to stay. She caught herself holding him longer, brushing her hand through his fur a little more slowly, memorizing every sound he made. Each time he blinked at her, she wondered, does he know? Does he feel it too? Then one afternoon, he didn't come back right away. He had gone out before sunset, as he often did now. weaving through the trees while she gathered wood nearby. She kept glancing toward the edge of the forest, heart quietly hammering. Minutes stretched. An hour passed. She returned to the cabin, left the door open. Another hour. Just as the stars began to appear, he returned. Silent, snow-dusted. He walked inside, brushed gently against her leg, and lay by the fire, as if to say, not yet, but soon. Claire sat beside him, tears pricking her eyes. Letting go wasn't a decision. It was a knowing. And it had already begun. Claire's hardest choice. The morning she knew was the last. Everything was quiet, too quiet. The wind was still. The trees outside stood motionless, their branches heavy with unmoved snow. Even the birds, those few who had returned with the hint of spring, were silent. Ash was already awake, sitting near the door, not pacing, not restless. Still, Claire watched him from the table, one hand wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee she hadn't touched. He wasn't looking at her. His yellow-green eyes were fixed on the woods beyond the porch, his ears forward, body calm but focused. She didn't speak, didn't move, because she knew. She rose slowly, set the cup down without sound, and walked to the door. Ash didn't flinch, didn't blink. She opened it. A gust of fresh morning air swept through the doorway, carrying the crisp scent of melting snow and pine needles. The sunlight streamed through the trees in long, golden fingers. Ash stepped forward. He didn't look back. Down the steps, into the snow-soft path that led toward the ridge, he moved with grace, his body low, his tail swaying gently. Claire followed him with her eyes until he reached the edge of the trees. There, he paused, and for one long moment, he turned his head, not toward the forest, but toward her. Their eyes met not as owner and animal, not as savior and rescued, but as something else, something wordless and ancient. Claire swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Be safe," she whispered. "Be wild." Ash turned, slipped between the trees and was gone. The silence left behind was vast, but it didn't echo the way it used to. It wasn't hollow. It was full, full of the memory of paw prints by the fire, of soft breaths in the dark, of knowing she had given something a second chance. Not just him, but herself. She didn't cry. Not then. She stepped outside and looked at the trail he left behind. The snow was already beginning to cover it. And that, she thought, was as it should be. Because love, real love, was not holding tight. It was knowing when to open the door. And trusting they'd carry a part of you with them, wherever they go. Footprints in the frost, an ending or a beginning. Spring came slowly to the forest. The snow melted in quiet patches, revealing earth dark and damp beneath it. Rivers thawed into trickles, then streams. Trees stretched toward longer sunlight, and the first hints of green began to whisper their way across the forest floor. Claire stayed. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The cabin no longer felt like a place to hide. It had become something else, a place of remembering, of rebuilding. Her mornings were filled with motion, cutting wood, cleaning, fixing what winter had worn down. Her evenings were filled with writing. She wrote about Ash, not just what he had done or how he had survived, but who he had been to her. How in the silence of snow, in the breath between loss and healing, he had stepped in, not to save her, but to remind her she still had something to give.